everybody. Hi.
How's everyone doing? Good. So maybe we should start off by saying who we are and what we do. I'll let you start.
Sure. First, I want to say it's really great to be here and honestly super inspiring to hear some of these stories of people that have had the courage to follow their dreams. I appreciate hearing those stories, and it inspires me. So I'm excited just to be here today. But my name's Guru Larson, and I work in the sustainability field. So essentially, what I do is help Columbia Sportswear understand our environmental impacts, set strategies to reduce those impacts, and then manage those strategies and programs. I've been doing this work for about 10 years now, all at Columbia Sportswear. I got into the field when I got into the field of sustainability when I started my studies. I was really interested in doing general business, and as I started to do projects for work and learn more about the business environment in general, I got put on this project with Cliff Bar, and they asked me in the project to do this research study on packaging. And through that study, we analyzed their packaging, and through that analysis, I realized, oh my God, if Cliff Bar adjusts their packaging, if they use less packaging, it has a better environmental impact and it has a better cost impact. And I was it made me realize, there's something to looking at at business through an environmental lens. So I got really interested in that, and then I just kind of honed in and got into the field. So that's a little background about me. What about you?
What about me? Well, I work for Keen Footwear. We're an independently owned, family-run, outdoor, mainly footwear brand here in Portland, Oregon. I've been there for about 5 years, originally from the UK. I've worked in the sports industry for a long time. Started with Adidas back in Europe and came over here with them. I've worked for Ama Sports as well, who were recently acquired by I think maybe Chinese holding company, Anta, I think it was. But worked across a number of outdoor brands like Salomon, Atomic, Suntoe, Arc'teryx, lots of iconic outdoor brands, which then kind of leads us on to this question around values, and that's really kind of why we're here to talk about values. And that also leads into sort of why we do what we do. So maybe, Guru, you can start with why do you do what you do?
Yeah, so one of the values at Columbia Sportswear is essentially just doing the right thing, which sounds relatively easy, but when you're kind of a big business, operate on a global scale and have complex supply chains and all that kind of stuff, it just means that it's important to kind of have some resources that help to understand, essentially just getting to the bottom of what are your impacts and what are the implications of the decisions that you make. So to me, if you're looking at values and doing the right thing, and from a sustainability perspective, I think one of the most important things is just understanding what it is that you're making and buying, and that you're doing that responsibly. And I think actually as a small business, you have a huge advantage because you've got probably direct oversight into what you're sourcing, where it's coming from, all that kind of stuff, and the bigger you get, the more complex that gets. But it's just, I think people want to do the right thing, but making sure that there's no forced labor used in your cotton, right? Or there's, for example, the leather that you're sourcing isn't coming from a region where where it's contributing to deforestation. These are not intentional decisions that anybody makes. But I think one of the most important things is just being able to understand the implications of your decisions. And that to me is like the crux of values, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would ask you, what does that mean to you?
Well,
And to
thanks
Keen,
for
if you want
asking
to add
that
that to Keen.
unrehearsed question.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's having worked for big brands like Adidas and Salomon and different brands who could be using their economic power to do more good. It's much more appealing to go and work for a brand that really do use their economic power to do good. And it's really easy to talk about being a values-driven company, right? First of all, you got to define, well, what do values mean, right? And it's a trap that you see some people fall into where they say, well, we donate 1% of our revenue to nonprofits, therefore we're values-driven. But I think if you are truly values-driven, if you're a values-driven brand, it has to permeate through every single part of the organization. It has to start with the top of your organization as well. It can't be, values just can't be the things that you print out as part of like a handout and pass around the company. They have to be in everything you do. So for me to go work for a brand that truly lives and stands by those values is very rewarding every day, right? And I never got that sense with Adidas or any of the other brands that I work for. Not that they're not phenomenal companies and make great products, but just for me, on a personal level, I wanted more than that. So.
And I would ask you, as a marketing professional, and I'm excited about this because I'm like, I'm going to ask him all the things I want to ask my marketing team. No, I'm just kidding. But so how does a brand go about communicating their values authentically?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And it's a minefield, let's be honest. It's a minefield, right? So it goes back to what we were just saying, that you have to define what your values are. And that could be that you live by your values just internally, right? And that you look after employees, you provide paid volunteer hours, you recycle, you do all these things. It doesn't necessarily have to be giving back. It could be, it's really up to you how you define values. And then there's some interesting ones around this, right? And this is where it becomes a little bit of a minefield. So very serendipitously, about 6 months ago, I was cruising, I think I was sitting in an airport somewhere, and I happened to read 2 different articles. One was around Keanu Reeves, and one was around the founder of Caesar's Pizza. Now, can anybody, no, I don't know if audience feedback really works too well, but anyway, imagine I asked you, how do those 2 stories live together? What pulled them, what do they have in common? Well, both of them were about those 2 different people giving back. And the word used on both of those 2 different articles were quietly. So they both gave, but they did it quietly, which I found really interesting. And that they'd been doing it for years and years and years and years, but it only just came out, right? So it just got picked up in the news that Keanu Reeves was giving money to, I think, to a children's hospital, and I forget which the charity that Mike was donating to. But it's the fact that it almost had a lot more weight by the fact that media had picked up on it and were reporting on it, as opposed to you, a company, a brand, saying, look at us, look at, we did this. Aren't we amazing, right? Because if you're not careful, that can come across as very disingenuous. And the backlash from that will far outweigh the benefits of you saying you're values-driven. So super, and there are some classic examples of how you do not want to screw it up that we can talk about.
Yeah. It just makes me think that being able to talk about what you do authentically is something we spend a lot of time thinking about. We feel like we've done a lot of work at Columbia. we've dedicated a lot of resources to our sustainability programs for a lot of time, but we haven't really built it successfully into our marketing narrative or communications. And we recognize, I think, that consumers want to hear more about it. People want to hear what we're doing, and it is something we really we think a lot about. And I feel like Keen, you guys really do a nice job in terms of, I have seen some of your engagement and activism campaigns. I love the telephone booth. I don't know if, has anyone done the telephone booth? Does anyone know what I'm talking about, the telephone booth? Yeah? It's like awesome. You can, you have telephone booths in different places. I mean, you probably can explain better than me.
Yeah, so we have 5 telephone booths sitting in a warehouse on Swan Island that we use at different events around the country. They're called our Call to Action phone booth. And they are basically old telephone booths that we've set up in such a way that you can ring a central number and you put in your zip code and it will put you through to your elected officials. And then in the phone booth, there are a number of scripts that you can use, and we tailor the scripts depending on where we're going to put these phone booths. So we try to pick up on local sort of social and environmental issues as well. Whoops, I'll move backwards here. It's just a way of giving people an opportunity to make sure their voices are heard. We don't sell anything off the back of it, and it's interesting that you say that Keen does a good job. We feel internally we've done a terrible job over the years of...
That's what you say, but I feel like I know what you guys stand for, and you have a very positive message.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good, and we do a lot of things, and it'll be interesting to hear about what Columbia do. I mean, we have a team of people that are very similar to Guru that
I know them,
you have like 50, we have 2, which is interesting. 30. And we have a dedicated team of people that look at our supply chain, they manage our grants programs, and we do a lot, and we've done that from day one. And what's interesting, and I only learned this recently, that our owner and founder, his very first business when he was in his early 20s was resoling shoes. And it wasn't about making new shoes. And when he first invented the Newport sandal, which most people know Keen for, it's actually not a very good business model because they last so long. They last like 5+ years. So you could say that from that, we're sustainable because of durability. These things, they're almost impossible to wear out. Talking of wearing out. Okay. We wore the microphone out. It's funny that we're only now starting to talk about what we do internally, because for us it's just been the way we do business. We don't do it to talk about it, we just do it because it's the right thing to do, and it's just how we do business. So,
speaking of talking about, didn't you launch a campaign today?
We did, yeah. So this morning we launched a new campaign. We did it internally to all of everybody inside of Keen, and we're calling it Consciously Created. And it's this idea, again, something we've talked about now for a long time, that we make things in a conscious way. So the leathers that we use come from certified tanneries. We're 95% PFC free, and we've recognized the fact that these are important things that, of course, they will ultimately help us sell product because people care about those things, but we've recognized more and more from a consumer perspective that people care about this kind of stuff, and it's good to educate people, but also educate the industry as well, and our retailers. So there's a little bit of backlash from our retailers that don't want to talk about these things because it shines a spotlight on all of their other brands that perhaps aren't as sustainable or clean or whatever. And it'd be interesting to hear your experience on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, was this working? Oh, it was working. Okay, now it's working. I would say, you're talking about education and kind of framing the issues and how people are getting a better sense of what's important. And I would say in the last 10 years, I've seen a real shift in that. We've started to see common methodologies and frameworks for understanding business impacts that has made it much easier to quantify and guide direction. And these frameworks are kind of industry-wide, so we're starting to speak the same language. And the clearer that we become, and the clearer we are on the issues, the easier it is for us to frame them up and communicate, well, for one, to make impact towards them, but also to educate consumers around them and to talk about them. And to me, it's just been very encouraging to see that clarity happen in the industry, where there's a real sense of an understanding about where our impacts are as a business, and that drives an urgency in wanting to do something about that. And I want to, speaking of urgency, and then I'll get to the retail thing, but we were talking about this, and I feel urgency more than ever around solving some of the problems around environmental impacts, especially when it comes to our broader supply chains. Like, I was listening to a story on NPR's a couple months ago around the fact that Chennai, big city in India, is running out of water. It's because one of the their local water source, they hadn't been monitoring it, been going down, and there was like a lot of industry that was like pulling water from the source. And I was just thinking, it's a big city. Like, what's going to happen if the city runs out of water? Like, I don't know. It just really impacted me. And like, we use a lot of water in our industry to dye fabrics, but the human impact of a city not having water there's like real vulnerable populations. And so I think that this is like important.
Agree. There is a real sense of urgency here. One thing I'm curious about is, how do you measure your impact? I mean, Columbia is huge. You've got multiple brands.
Yeah.
How do you measure it? And then can every brand outside of Columbia use those same benchmarks?
Yes. Yeah. So our role, we work with all the brands within the Columbia portfolio, which is like Sorel, Prana, Mountain Hardwear, and the Columbia brand. And we use a framework called the Higg Index to measure. So we work with all of our factories and raw material vendors, and we have them fill out this annual assessment. So we collect how much energy they're using, what types of fuel sources, is it coal, is it biomass, do they have boilers or generators on site? Like, like, how much water are they using? Are they recycling their water? Are they treating their water? Like, all that kind of stuff. And so we do that through this annual assessment, the Higg Index, which is an assessment that the industry created, which a lot of other brands use. I know Keen uses that in your supply chain as well. It's helpful to players like Nike and Adidas and H&M and Target and so on and so forth are also using these same frameworks. So we have a very, a shared supply chain. So a lot of our factories, that make any given product are also making stuff for, it could be Keen if it's footwear, or the North Face or Patagonia, or even H&M, or depending on what the product is. So it's really helpful that we're all using these same tools. So we use the Higg Index for measuring supply chain impacts, and then we measure the impacts of our the material portfolio that we use, and we use LCA-based data sources for measuring those impacts, and we look at what types of materials use more water, what uses less, what about these different dye technologies, what happens if we add this finish or whatever. So yes.
Right.
Is that interesting or no?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And so do you feel that you're done, it's good, or what do you feel about that?
Right. No. Okay, so we were just talking about this. So we just finished... I'm sure you guys have seen, there's a lot of buzz about setting targets, like setting global carbon footprint targets that include Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, which includes all your emissions in your supply chain, right? And that's actually a big endeavor. Like, we use the Higg Index to help inform that, but to get all that information compiled and accurate and then be able to do forecasting around it, be like, okay, so if we do X, Y, and Z action, like how much is that going to get us on our emissions reduction, and like can we actually credibly set this target, and do we understand what we have to do to be able to achieve that? So we just finished our first global baseline in our forecasting, and we haven't even talked about it internally yet, but I'm like, part of me, I had so much anxiety because I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of information. Is it all correct? Like, I don't, it just feels very overwhelming. But I went on a bike ride with a colleague from Nike, not colleague, but like an industry brand partner from Nike. And they have done this, like, they're like 10 years into this. And they said, you know what? It took us about 4 years to get our baseline to a place where we felt really good about it, but every single year that we did it was important because we learned new things, we got better information, we got more granularity. So anyway, but it just made me feel, I was like, okay, this is okay.
So would you say it's like a journey?
It's a journey, yes.
Does the journey have an ending?
No, you keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you think you are on the journey right now?
God, I don't know, we're on it. We're in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're deep in the mud. There we go. I don't know. That's where I think. What about you? Where would you guys say you're on the journey?
We're on it. Yeah, we're on it as well.
Yeah.
The campaign that will actually kind of go more public facing next week is really talking about that journey. And it is, and I think that's the one of the takeaways that we wanted to get across is, don't be afraid to take a step on that journey and just treat it as a journey, right? And don't feel that it has to be perfect. I think if you're honest and you're transparent, your consumers will be far more willing to understand that than if you try and greenwash something. It's the worst thing you can do. Just be honest about things and say, this is a journey, we're far from perfect. Much better to do that than to do nothing. Because I think the backlash side of things, and I call it a backlash, but it can be really interesting and it can be quite damaging. There's a couple of well-publicized examples of that some of you probably have read about recently. There was the Gillette one that came along at the beginning of the year. If you haven't seen it, check it out. So they had their campaign of the best a man can get for many, many years, right? And then they launched a campaign called the best a man could be, something along those lines. And there was a lot of backlash from that, right? The intent was really honorable, and they were trying to do the right thing. They were trying to play on sort of current themes and trends, but they seemed culturally off base, right? They just didn't nail it. It wasn't well executed. And as a result, what was also interesting at the same time, they're a P&G company. Their valuation was at $57 billion. The valuation came down by $8 billion during this time. Could you say that was a direct result of the ad campaign? Maybe, maybe not. But just interesting, those two things coincide, right? And then same with Pepsi. A few years ago, Pepsi did their sort of play on Black Lives Matter, and they had Kendall Jenner in it. And it backfired on them, and it was disingenuous, it wasn't authentic, they didn't do a good job. But look at I think it was Always did a Run Like a Girl campaign, and then Dove have done their things as well. Nailed it. Amazing messaging, well positioned, well thought through. Check them out and make your own minds up. But there's a couple of good examples of how to do it and maybe how not to do it.
So do you have any advice on how to not fall into the pitfall of, doing it bad?
Yeah, I mean, don't use jazz hands when you do something that people expect you to do, right? I mean, there was another really interesting article after the Pride events recently where a lot of brands jump on the Pride bandwagon and they, might do a rainbow T-shirt or something. And then it's like, look at our jazz hands, we're supporting the LGBT community. I mean, it can come across as disingenuous. You just got to be really, really careful. And that's why I think sometimes you're better off doing it, getting on with it, don't talk about it, build that really strong foundation so you can stand behind it, and then maybe talk about it, right? I think setting yourself, almost creating a brand that is values-led to talk about your values it can be quite dangerous. How did Columbia deal with values and talking about it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that what we've started to see is the brand play a bigger role in these societal conversations. Historically have been kind of quiet in that space, but I think there's just been a recognized need to sometimes stand up and say something, you know, and I think it's great. But it's very interesting because, okay, I can just think of two where, you know, Tim Boyle, the CEO, kind of made some public stances or whatever around like immigration, and there was another one, public lands, and so on and so forth. And I think it actually is really important, and that especially from an employee perspective, that we want to see. We want to know what the values of the brand are, and that really gets demonstrated through those voices. But it's not without complications, as you said. People have different opinions, and there are different values. And being a brand that is sold globally across the country in every market, you know, and a lot of different categories, you just have to be willing. You have to have a point of view and be okay with going out with it, and knowing that not everyone is going to agree with it. Yeah. Yeah. And we've definitely seen heat every single time the company makes a value-based position. Yeah. There's trolls, lots of them, lots of trolls.
That's true. Yeah, and that's probably two other maybe pieces of insights and maybe advice is that you can see backlash, right, when you stand up for something, because the world is very polarized, right? But don't be afraid about that. The way that we look at it at Keen is that we're still a modest but growing brand, and there are far more people that don't know us that know us. And when we talk about things like climate change, we'll see a huge spike in negative sentiment, right? And that can be scary, and you're like, holy crap, let's not talk about that anymore. That went badly. But that's who we are as a brand, and we're going to keep talking about it. And we're going to kind of stand by our values, because overall, when you look at your sentiment, promoter score, whatever you use, you'll see that it's positive, right? And that's what we see. So we stand by our values, and we're going to keep talking it regardless.
How do you figure out what you decide to talk about or weigh in on from a value position?
So that's a journey. That's a total journey, and we've been actually Chris and I, the equivalent of Guru over at Keen, we've been going through some exercises recently where we're saying, because we don't as a brand define our end user, we can get involved in multiple different conversations, and we've set up a model to say, let's list as many of these conversations out as we know about right now. What do we want to invest in? What do we want to divest from? And what do we want to harvest? So what are we going to actively pursue? So public lands, check. We're going to pursue that. We're not going to talk about religion. We're going to divest. We're not going to get involved. And then there's other things that, as and when they come up, sure, we'll pitch in. But one of the key things there is to make sure you're ready for it. So on your customer service people, on your sales reps, everyone in your organization has to know how you stand on things, because one person saying one thing that doesn't align with your company values the impact can be quite devastating, right? So, and can get picked up. What about Columbia? What do they do?
Well, that's not my division. I'm just
kidding. Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I actually don't know if I can speak to. I don't make the decisions on what we talk about, what we don't talk about. But what I would thought, because you were talking about how you might be going about thinking through the process of what you choose to talk about and not. And what I thought I would share is how you might go about the process if you haven't looked at your business from a sustainability perspective, how you might get started in doing so. If you are a small, medium-sized organization or just getting started or whatever, I think that in a lot of cases, it's actually more intuitive than one might think. And to me, it's just about really, it's about being mindful of the decisions that you're making. And an easy way to start would, simply be getting somebody that has some expertise, getting an expert or something to come in and just do a basic assessment so you understand from your perspective, where are your unique impacts? And oftentimes there are some very, very simple things you can do to just focus on that, that make a big difference. And knowing that from the get-go can be really important and help to kind of, help you go in the right direction. So that was kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's great.
It's not anything.
That's great. Yeah, and we're out of time, so we were worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about, but we're out of time, and so thank you very much, everyone.